Hello, art historians. Here is our last, oh my goodness, here is our last set of um, Egyptian artifacts. So we'll do 3 more today, and then we'll be done with Egypt, and we'll move on to Greece and Rome. And this is a favorite of mine. Behind Hatshepsut, this is probably my favorite Egyptian relic. So here you see Akhenaton and his wife, Nefertiti, who most of us have heard of, and their 3 daughters. And so this is the New Kingdom, but you're going to see that there it says Amarna, because this is called the Amarna period. For a little tiny blip, not even 20 whole years, for a little tiny blip, Akhenaten moves the capital of Egypt from Thebes to Amarna. And he does a whole big change in the religion and in the sort of the thought processes of how to appropriately worship. And we call this, while it is still the New Kingdom, we call it the Amarna period. And so 1353 to 1335 BCE, and this is when Akhenaten moves everything to Amarna. Now, the interesting thing is when we think about some of our artifacts that we've done before. I'm going to scroll backwards really quickly and show something to you. You're going to notice that there is no construction that takes place under Akhenaten. And that is because he doesn't use this complex. He moves everything to Amarna and he ignores all of the other stuff. So this is, we call it a time period hiccup. It's like a little bloop that is not quite the same as everything around it. And it's an odd little period where his name was not always Akhenaten. His name was Amenhotep IV. And, he is one of the, chosen God pharaohs. And there are other Amenhoteps, but he's Amenhotep IV. And when he becomes pharaoh, he says, there's a lot of problems in Thebes right now and in the way that we're running things. And the priests have become too powerful and they're trying to push the monarchs, the pharaohs around. And we're getting too many kings and there's too many gods and there's too much happening. And so we need to fix all of this. And so he picks up the entire royal court and moves it to Amarna. And when they get there, he takes them from being polytheistic, worshiping many gods, to a monotheistic religion, one religion only. And they become monotheistic and they begin to worship the Aten, the sun disk. This is the Aten right here. Okay. And so he changes his name to Akhenaten, which basically translates into like the one who worships the Aten. And so he in service to the Aten, the one who follows the Aten. That's what Akhenaten means. So he changes his name. He becomes Akhenaten. They become a monotheistic religion. He removes the power from the priests because he believes that they were becoming too powerful and taking power away from the pharaoh. And so he takes out that middleman, and it is believed the way that he runs his religion is that the king doesn't need the priests to talk to the Aten. The king can confer with and can work with the Aten on his own. And so this is a major change in Egypt, and it only happens for a little bit. And this is a statue that is indicative of that time period. Now, Amenhotep IV has a couple of wives. Nefertiti is one of them. And I'm sure you have heard of Nefertiti. And one of his other wives, he has a child with one of his other wives, and that child is Tutankhamun, or King Tut. And so Akhenaton, Amenhotep IV, is Tut's father, and Nefertiti is Tut's stepmother. And so that sort of gives you the lay of the land here. Now, this is the statue or the relief figure that it's called a relief because it just goes up on the wall. But I want to show you a couple of things first. This is Nefertiti, the most famous and one of the few depictions that we have of her. This is in Berlin. This is one of the statues of Akhenaten that is still intact, that we were able to find. And what you're going to see here with Akhenaten is, unlike a lot of the depictions of pharaohs prior to this, there is a little bit of their bodies are considered epicene, Epicene, which means like not necessarily masculine or not necessarily feminine, just sort of like something in the middle, because he does sort of have that belly that we often see with women, and his face is not such hard defined lines. So let's go back and look at, let's go back and look at our figures of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. And we're going to look at a couple of things. First, we're going to talk about the fact that this is a relief. It's a sunken relief because it was a flat piece and everything is carved down into it. We're going to see that we have the Aten here, and the Aten is reaching out to Akhenaten and to Nefertiti. And you're going to see that Akhenaten has one of his daughters in his hand. Here's one of their daughters on Nefertiti's lap and another one on her shoulder. Now, this is a little harder to see, so what I'm going to do is scroll forward. And this is a drawing of this same piece. This is what it would have looked like. And here you see a little closer. Here's the hand of the Aten, and here is an Ankh, which is the symbol of life, and Ankh is spelled Ankh. This is the hand of the Aten. That is the symbol of the Aten god. And so let's look at some of our stuff that we see here. We have one of the girls on Nefertiti's lap. We have another one of the girls in Nefertiti's arm touching her mother's earring. We have Akhenaten holding the third girl. And then we see, I'm hoping you've probably noticed this, look at their heads. Their heads are very oddly shaped. And there are a lot of questions about that. Some of the questions are like, why are their heads so elongated? Does it have to do with, and this is not a joke, it doesn't have to do with the fact that there was a great deal of intermarrying and incestual children, or is this an attempt to make their heads in the same shape as the hand of the Aten? Are they trying to echo that in these shapes? It's probably more that. But some people say they look like aliens. Please don't fall into the idea that there are alien people, because there's not. What do we see though? We see there are much softer lines. Their facial features are much softer. They're much more human looking. All of the lines are softer. They just feel more relaxed, more lifelike. And so when we see this, we see a bunch of different things. Oh, let's talk about Nefertiti first for a second. Nefertiti, the name means the beautiful one is here. And so it's this really beautiful family portrait that we see. And so their feet are not on the ground because they are gods. They're divinely chosen, so they can't put their feet on the ground. And here we see him offering some love to his child as the god, the sun god Aten blesses them. Now, when we back out and we look at this piece, you can see all of the sort of broken pieces. And when we back out, you can tell that this is broken here and it's broken there. And many of these pieces, actually the majority of things that are found in Amarna are found broken. And that is because when Akhenaten dies, the priests and Nefertiti realize that this whole Amarna thing is not working. And Nefertiti moves back to Thebes with Akhenaten's son, Tutankhamun, And she reigns for just a little while. Nefertiti is in charge for a little while, and then Tut becomes pharaoh under the guidance of Nefertiti and the priests. They realize that this monotheistic thing out in Amarna isn't working, and they all move back to Thebes. And when they all move back to Thebes, most of the stuff that is a depiction of Akhenaton out in Amarna is destroyed. And it's the same way that, but not like a nicely destroyed thing, but like real destroyed. Almost every single thing is completely obliterated, because they were trying to erase Akhenaten and this time period off of the history of Egypt and deny Akhenaten his chance to be in the afterlife, because he had so gone back against all of these things that were believed by the majority of the Egyptian empire. So when Akhenaten dies and Nefertiti moves back to Thebes with Tut, she rules for a little bit, and then she dies, and Tut becomes pharaoh. And when Tut is, some say 18, some say 19, but when Tut is either 18 or 19, Tut dies, and he is put into a tomb in what is called the Valley of the Kings, because what they begin to do when they start to bury the dead is they bury them in these, I'm going to scroll forward, in these chambers that are built into this area. Now, this little wall here was built by archaeologists after it was found. But what would happen is there would just be all of these hills, and the tomb would be buried in the ground. And it was because after all of the plundering and stealing from things like the Temple of Hatshepsut and the fact that the pyramids were completely grave robbed, they started hiding the bodies of the dead. And so what you end up with when Tutankhamun becomes king is they're burying the kings in the Valley of the Kings. And so we have a couple of things. We're going to talk first about, there's an archaeologist named Howard Carter. Let's go back here again for a second. This is Howard Carter. And there's an archaeologist named Howard Carter who is digging in all of this area in the Valley of the Kings. And because of a landslide that was believed to have happened shortly after Tut was killed, shortly after Tut was buried, and then a bunch of other digging to find other things, they actually believe that the entrance to Tut's tomb had been covered by rocks and debris. And so when Howard Carter uncovers Tut's tomb in 1922, it was and still is the only tomb we've ever found that was fully undisturbed. So when Howard Carter finally got through the initial passageway and got to the door of Tut's tomb, it was still intact like this. This is the handle, this is the other handle, this is the rope, and it was still completely intact. So they had to cut the rope and they had to go down in here. So I'm down here in this color picture, and they come down here into this corridor, and there's a room filled with all of this stuff. So here's all these, chairs and things like that. And then there's this room over here that's filled with all the wagons and things like that. And then there's this room over here, room 4, which is filled with more gold stuff, and his organs in their canopic jars are inside this big, giant gold box. And then this is where his tomb is here. And it's a tomb inside a tomb inside a tomb. It's like a box inside a box inside a box with this little guy here on the very inside with his mummy inside. So what's interesting about this is it allowed, here's the picture that Howard Carter took in 1922, and then here is sort of a colorized version of what it looks like. What's interesting about this, one, is it was completely undisturbed. 2, the body of the mummy of Tut is inside this, like you can see this exterior coffin and then the interior coffin, and then there was another coffin around it and a final coffin around that. And then you can see all this yucky stuff. That's called bitumen. It's like tar. And that is over top of the innermost coffin. Now, this exterior coffin is now in the Egyptian Museum, along with all of the artifacts from Tut's tomb. This, the innermost coffin, has been returned to his burial chamber here. So he's back where he belongs. So what's interesting is, with Thebes becomes polytheistic again. He becomes king when he's 18 with a little help of Nefertiti. And he dies when he's either 18 or 19. There's a whole lot of stuff that's odd about Tut's tomb. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. There are several, like I said, sarcophagi. There's an outside cedar box, and then there's another wood box that is covered with gold leaf, and then there's another box, and then there's the innermost coffin, which is covered with pitch. What's interesting about Tut, and there are a lot of questions about why Tut looks the way he does, and why Tut's tomb here, his innermost coffin, and why the walls of the tomb look the way they do. He died unexpectedly, and he died very young. And while we have found so many other tombs of pharaohs in the Valley of the King, the one for Tutankhamun is significantly smaller than the rest of them. And the decorations on the walls, the painting on the walls, are significantly less complicated. And it's interesting when you look at this, that the body shape seems much different than many of the other pieces of pharaonic relics that we have. There are questions about whether this tomb was actually for Tut, and whether that gold coffin was actually for Tut. And the interesting thing is, this outer coffin, this big square one, could not fit through this doorway. They had to take out a chunk of this doorway in order to get his coffin in here. And recent scans of the area indicate that there may be, back behind this wall, there may be an additional room back here. And there are many questions as to whether or not this tomb might have actually been for Nefertiti, and that she may be back behind here. This is current thinking. Now, you could probably listen to this video in 5 years and they will have proved that that's wrong. But current thinking is that there's a very good chance that her tomb is either here off this edge of his tomb, or here off this edge of his tomb, and that all of this was actually built for her. And why they think that is, it's clear that this tomb was put together very quickly. It is clear that his embalming was also done much faster. It appears that the sarcophagus was too big for the room. It appears that his burial was rushed. It appears that the statue, his interior coffin statue, is more feminine than we might have expected. And so there are two reasons for that. One, it could have been a new conventions of the canon of proportions, or it could be that this gold coffin might have been actually meant for Nefertiti. Again, these are some current questions that they have. So there are a lot of things. His feet don't appear to fit quite right in his in that innermost coffin. There are a lot of questions. And so if you have the opportunity to look, pay attention to some of the stuff that they're doing with 3D scans and things like that, about the possibility of this having been Nefertiti's tomb. Now, as we look at this, we see again the beard. Okay, we see the headpiece that shows us that this is Ra. We see this is called the crook, and this is called a flail, and these are the signs of the symbols of Osiris. And so these are common iconography pictures that we are used to, or images that we're used to seeing, that are attached to that are attached to ancient Egyptian death practices. Now, as we move forward, the next thing I'm going to show you is super, super, super cool. And this is another reason that they wonder what was going on with Tut's tomb, is that when someone is of importance is buried, there is usually what is called a Book of the Dead created for them. And it is a very long piece. I'll show you. Here are some art historians and conservationists putting together this Book of the Dead into this case. And it runs, it starts here back on this back wall, and it runs all the way up here and up here and up here. And here you see them carrying the package that it is in. This is a piece of the Book of the Dead. It's a huge book that describes, the events of the person's life, and as they go to fight for their right to live forever in eternity. There is no real Book of the Dead in Tutankhamun's tomb. There's a very, very short version, but it's nothing like anyone has ever seen before. And so there are questions about whether or not Tut's tomb was actually meant for him. So that brings us to Book of the Dead. So this is a page, just a section from the Book of the Dead that is in the tomb of this guy whose name is Hunefer. Okay, and so here he is going in front of all of the gods to argue whether or not he should be given eternity. It's painted papyrus. It is, 1 foot and 6 inches, so 18 inches high, and they're feet and feet and feet and feet long. Okay? And it's a scroll. And so papyrus is used like for thousands of years, up until the Middle Ages, when they begin to use a little more parchment and stuff like that. So the Book of the Dead is prayers and spells and charms and directions and instructions on how to get to the afterlife and what to do once you get there. So Hunefer was the royal scribe of the pharaoh Seti I. He was also the overseer of the royal cattle stock. It's a very, very high position in his society. Scribe, we talked about that. He was very, very important. And that is reflected in the quality of his Book of the Dead. And so again, this is just like some royal scribe who's not even like royalty, like a divine god. And his Book of the Dead is way better than Tut's. Again, there's that question. So what happens is Hunefer is, we're trying to tell this in pieces, because this is Hunefer here up at the top doing his job, right? And then Hunefer is here again with Anubis. And then Hunefer is here again with Thoth, and then Hunefer shows up again here with Osiris. And so what is happening here is here we see him first, Hunefer. We see him on what is called the Fields of Peace. And he shows up here, and here is where his life is judged as to whether or not he deserves to be in the divine light, in the fields of peace for forever. And this is Anubis, who is the guardian of the underworld. And he protects the scales. So this is right here, this little tiny figure right here. This is Ma'at, M-A-A-T. The goddess of truth, goddess of justice, the goddess of balance. These are her scales, and Anubis protects her and her scales. And what happens is, and then this is Amut, A-M-M-U-T. And so what happens is you take his heart, right, Hunefer's heart, and you put it on the scale, and then you take his life, right, the feather of Ma'at, and you balance Hunefer's heart with the feather of Ma'at to judge, to look at whether or not Hunefer was truthful, whether or not he was evil, whether he wasted his life, whether he did good things, whether he did bad things. If he was bad, Amut this guy right here, would eat his heart, and he would have no immortality, and his body and his everything would just be done. He would be finished. But if he is thought to be good and to achieve it, then he gets to move forward and walk with Thoth to be presented to Osiris. And so we see here, he walks up with Anubis, they measure it, Thoth is here, he brings him up, so Thoth is like, yeah, you're good, everything's solid. And then we're able to walk him over here so that he can meet with Osiris and Anubis. Okay, so that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the story. Up here, you see him, in the story of his life, trying to tell all of the things that he did. So it's a really cool story. And when we look at it, we have to remember that the Egyptians believed that the heart was like the seat of your emotions and your intellect and your character and everything that was important. And they threw away the brain. They didn't quite understand the importance of the brain yet. And so if your heart was lighter than the feather, you got eternal life. If your heart was heavier than the feather, then you got to go into the world of the gods. And so Thoth is writing down all the events in hieroglyphics, and this is what you see here in this writing above them, Thoth, writing down all of the events. And so, and it is believed that Thoth invented hieroglyphics. And then you come up to Osiris, and here are the lotus flowers, which are believed to be the flowers of eternal life. And here are the four that are symbolic of the canopic jars, and Isis back here, and he is presented. And so we see in kind of like the standard of Ur, a telling of a story. Okay, and so here's a cute little comic version of it. So it's a narrative in art. It's a scroll, and so that's how we are able to really have a good idea of what the Egyptians believed, is because we were able to read and then translate all of these scrolls and hieroglyphics when the Rosetta Stone was found. And that's one that I can't believe they actually don't give you as one of your images. But the Rosetta Stone was found in 1799 in Egypt. It was translated in 1822. But prior to 1822, no one understood what any of the hieroglyphics meant. And so in 1822, his name is Champollion. He was able to, I think Jean-Francois Champollion or something like that. He was able to translate hieroglyphics using the Rosetta Stone. And so once we were able to translate those, we were able to figure out what all of these things meant. So that's the end of Egypt. When I see you next time, we will be working on ancient Greece, and have a great day.